Good morning, fourth graders. This is Miss Ferguson. It is Thursday, May 7th, 2020. So, as you know, we have been working on our nonfiction reading skills, and we've specifically this week been talking about main idea, and we've been working with different articles that have different headings within the article. And we've been talking about the main idea for each section and seeing how each section and its individual main idea connects to the other sections as well as the overall main idea of the article. So when we're talking about nonfiction text, a really important skill is something that we call determining importance. So when you determine importance, you're seeing how important something is relative to something else. So what I mean by that is we're going to be talking today about how I can explain how the main ideas of different sections of nonfiction text are connected, which we've been doing, and I can determine which details are important and which details are interesting and explain how they relate to the main idea. So when we're reading nonfiction text, and we've been practicing every day with our news ELA articles, and that will be continuing, when we're reading that nonfiction text, sometimes we come across information that's interesting, but it doesn't necessarily connect or support the main idea. So part of our job as a reader, when we're thinking as we read, is thinking about, is this particular piece of information important? Or is this something interesting that the author included? For something to be considered a key detail, it has to connect to that main idea that the author is trying to present to us. In most books or articles, the author fills the pages with lots of different information, and some of it's important or considered key, and some of it's meant to amaze us or gross us out or make us more intrigued. Basically, those details that are more interesting help keep us engaged with what we're reading. They're not always key details that support the main idea. When we go to summarize, and when we summarize a text, we determine the main idea and the supporting details. We have to, as a reader, sort through all of that information and be able to present what's connected to the main idea and maybe not include that interesting information that is fun or interesting or cool to read about, but it might not connect to the main idea. A good example is if I'm reading a book about the Middle Ages and I read about how Joan of Arc was accused of witchcraft and she was burned at the stake. I might think, wow, I had no idea. That is a really cool piece of information. I find that fascinating. But that little detail might not actually connect to the overall main idea of the book, which would be that during that time, with castles and knights, actually very few people had power. And it was about the harsh lives that they led. So that cool detail about Joan of Arc is interesting and it makes me want to learn more, but it might not connect to the overall main idea. So as you're reading your nonfiction text this week, so you're going to be doing it in your packet and you're going to be doing it again on News ELA. Remember that your reading is always thinking. So when you read a fact in nonfiction text, you need to ask yourself whether the fact supports the main idea of the text or even a particular page or section. If it doesn't connect to that main idea, it may be considered interesting, but not necessarily important. Today, you're going to be reading an article in your packet about making Election Day a holiday. You will also be going on News ELA and practicing that article again. What I want you to do when you're reading your article is identify the main idea of the different sections. And you're going to be explaining again how they are connected. You should also be thinking about which details specifically support the main idea and which details might just be interesting facts. I want you to make notes on your article, or you could do it on a separate sheet of paper if you prefer, but it might just be easiest to do it on the article itself, and then you have it all in one place. I want you to make those notes about which details are supporting the main idea that you've identified and which ones might just be interesting and don't actually connect to the main idea. Maybe the author threw them in there for us to keep things interesting and engaging. When you're reading that nonfiction text, some things that you can do are say different things to yourself to kind of engage yourself when you're thinking. So you might ask yourself, is this interesting or is this important? And then, well, how do I know that? How do I know that this would be considered interesting? And how do I know that this would be considered important? If you're identifying it as being important, then you need to be able to explain how it connects and supports the main idea. So the next thing you should always do is map out in your head or even on paper how it connects to the main idea. If you can't show how it connects to the main idea, then perhaps it's one of those interesting facts, but isn't necessarily one of those important or essential facts. If it doesn't connect to the main idea, file it away as something interesting or fun. You still learned something from it, but it's not necessarily one of those key details that the author needs us to know to support the main or central idea of their article. This is an important reading skill because as we become better readers, we're reading even more lengthy or involved text. Every day we've been practicing reading our nonfiction news ELA articles, and we can all agree that those articles contain a lot of information. When it's our job to summarize, so when we have to find the main idea in supporting details, we have to be able to pull apart those details and determine which ones are important and which ones we could file away for later as something interesting or fun, but that we don't necessarily need to include in a summary. So it's really important that we practice every day separating those details into what's interesting and what's important because we know that summaries are brief. We don't want a very lengthy paragraph that's a summary. So we need to be able to simplify it for ourselves. And the first step to that is determining what is important. Girls, we're going to be practicing this every day. And what I'm going to have you do today is the agenda is on Class Dojo. After you do this lesson video, you need to go into your packet and do the news ELA article there. So you'll be reading about Election Day potentially being considered a holiday, and you're going to complete your graphic organizer. So you're going to be identifying the main ideas of the section that you're given, and you're going to connect them to each other by explaining in that part of the graphic organizer. Then you need to go on newsela.com and you're going to access the same article. So you're going to practice your close reading by rereading it, and then you'll be using the activities there. So you'll take your quiz and you'll be doing your writing prompts on the News ELA website. And lastly, you need to make sure that you do your 35 minutes of reading, you pick your daily prompt and record it in your packet, and you get a parent or guardian signature once your checklist is complete. We will talk more tomorrow about main idea and these important details. And just keep practicing. Reading is thinking. It's okay to reread the article more than once you're supposed to. It's awesome to take notes. If it helps you to write down and separate them out, you could even use post-it notes and write down what's interesting and what's important and separate them into different piles. Whatever works for you to help think about the text. Have a great day, girls, and I will talk to you soon.